Canberra by Professor John Blaxland, who's Professor of International Security and Intelligence Studies at the ANU. Thanks for joining us, John. I appreciate your time. Most Australians, I would think, a lot of us might have thought that the Australian Federal Police, ASIO, and even some of our defence signals intelligence organisations would be cooperating already. Why is it unusual that they would start to share information?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to note here, Chris. Firstly, that these organisations operate under different legislative remits. So their original purpose and their current purpose has been really shaped by a legacy of legislation that gives them distinct responsibilities and compartmented control and limitations, and they're for very good reasons that have been the subject of the Royal Commissions that Justice Robert Marsden Hope chaired, and subsequent reviews that have been conducted over the intelligence community periodically over the years that have really validated the purpose of giving very clear mandates and very clear limits to the mandates of the various organisations. That's partly to assure Australian people that these agencies aren't going rogue, that they're operating within a very clear mandate, and that there are oversight mechanisms in place for us to have a level of assurance that what they're doing is not only the right thing, but that it's measured, that it's proportionate, and that it is auditable. But what we're seeing today is that there's a blurring. There's a blurring of the responsibilities. And partly that reflects the changes of technology. The bottom line is that the world is not what it used to be. We're not in an analogue world anymore. We're in a digital world, and we're in a digital world that's enabled by artificial intelligence and really sophisticated algorithms. That means that the new fifth generation technology is giving people the ability to reach in from afar in a more intrusive way than ever before.
Now, what are we worried about here? What is the Australian government and these agencies worried about most? Is it Chinese interference in our democracy, to use the broader level, but as we've seen recently in party politics, also, I suppose, in terms of our university agendas and of course, commercial operations?
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of all of the above, actually, Chris. It's not just one thing, unfortunately. It's very interesting.
But it's mainly China?
Writing on the history, I think it's probably fair to say that, yes. When I was writing the history of ASIO with Professor David Horner and my colleague Rhys Crawley, we were initially looking at foreign interference as a kind of antiquated Cold War concept. But as we were approaching the completion of the project, it became apparent that this is something becoming real again. And that was now back in 2015, 2016. 3 years later, we're seeing that sense of concern and anxiety accentuated further, in part because the game has accelerated. The scale of it is increased, the concern is greater, the awareness is more profound. There is a recognition that the challenges we face are real, and that what people are seeing in the newspapers and on their television screens about developments in Xinjiang province, in Hong Kong, and let alone in Australia with our own politicians, at my own very own university, the Australian National University. The news just the other day that the Australian Capital Territory government has been subject of a cyber attack. The combination of these factors of influence, of peddling influence, of seeking to purchase influence by paying money into political parties and to the campaign funds of wannabe politicians, of undermining the cyber security of our information technology, the combination of that with the scale of the challenge and the increased sense of concern about China and other countries that are demonstrably not as benign as we'd hoped they would turn out to be. That combination is generating a real concern about the need to act in a way that looks beyond the stovepipes.
It is such a bizarre situation, such a challenging situation, isn't it? Where it's our greatest economic partner, but also our greatest threat when it comes to this sort of foreign interference.
Well, you know, this is the challenge we face. We've got this dialectic. We've got to reconcile in our consciousness. The fact is that the bottom line is that our trade is very much dependent on China buying stuff from us, and yet our security is very much tied with our security arrangements with the United States and with other Western partners, and with our neighbours, particularly in Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
That
means we've got a delicate balancing act.
It sure is a delicate balancing act. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us, John. I appreciate it. We do need to go to a break.
Thanks, Chris.